Seminar 5, Day 1, Afternoon, Session, Person First Language. Learning objectives. Understand what harmful language is. Understand stigmatizing language. Understand person first language. Understand identity first language. Understand deficits-based language. Understand strengths-based language. Understanding how culture affects language. As a peer supporter, just starting out and providing support groups, I will never forget the day that a participant in my group told me they were struggling with some of the words I used. The participant was also a peer supporter and had more knowledge of person-centered language than I had, having been in the field longer than me. I'll tell you what I said and what they suggested, but I warn you it might cause a bit of discomfort. I was doing a peer-supported group where I was supposed to show that I also faced serious struggles like many participants. There was a question in the homework we were discussing that asked us to name something we have struggled with but grew from. I said, "When my sister committed suicide, I struggled deeply, but changed my life in a big way and found a way to grow from it." At the end of the group, the participants said they also had a person in their family die from suicide and that they have learned that saying committed suicide has the connotation that the person has committed a crime or done something immoral, and that saying this brought up uncomfortable feelings for them. It was at this point that the only solution I had was to say I was sorry for causing the discomfort and be honest that they had a valuable point that I would keep in mind during future groups. Sometimes that's all you can do. This quote from Dakota Fisher, creator of Radical Recovery Peer Support, illustrates that words can hurt other people and that even if we don't know we are saying something harmful, we should be flexible and learn from experience. A positive thing that came from this was advocacy. Dakota decided to advocate for person-first language by helping develop this course and including it in the training process for all potential facilitators of Radical Recovery Peer Support. The information in this course comes from a focus group that thought hard about words and phrases that they have heard that might be stigmatizing or hurtful to different types of people. Some insights also come from Sam HSA's GET, or Guide to Equity Terminology. Culture can also be an important component of language. What is acceptable use of language in one culture may be different based on the culture another person is a part of. Culture helps us understand the impact of words on different people. Words can also have cultural or historic roots. This chapter also explores language from a cultural perspective. Section 1. Adapted from SAMHSA's GET. One thing is clear from the Guide to Equity Terminology. Even words that are meant to be person-first that are being used today might change because they don't work for everyone. The best advice in responding to a person who is offended by word choice is to apologize and ask them what they would prefer. You say instead, Principles of Equity Terminology. Equitable terminology refers to purposeful use of language to promote inclusivity and reduce stigma. It is built on the principles of being person-centered, strengths-based, non-stigmatizing, and ever-evolving. Person first. Considering a person as a whole person by not describing them in a limited way, such as using labels or identifiers. Consider the intersectionality of the wide array of their qualities and place the person before the identifier, disability, diagnosis, or other characteristics. Strengths-based, depicting people in terms of their strengths rather than their perceived weaknesses. If we must talk about someone's weaknesses or deficits, we should always balance the conversation by acknowledging equally valid strengths. It is also a good idea to always address strengths first rather than weaknesses, so that the initial impression is a positive one rather than one that builds prejudgments. Non-stigmatizing. Stigmatizing language devalues individuals, their families, and their communities. It is language that may be discriminatory, prejudicial, offensive, or have a negative connotation. Stigmatizing language can cause people who it is directed toward to internalize the words as their identity, or to begin to identify with such words, thereby influencing a person's self-image. Ever evolving. Language is fluid. It changes. Anything that may sound less stigmatizing to one person or group may be interpreted as stigmatizing by another person or group. The power of words in behavioral health. Shifting attitudes to increase support. Samas's Get illustrates how the words substance abuse creates an impression of prejudicial beliefs that hinder the ability of a person to get help for use of drugs or alcohol, but it also reduces the willingness of others to help people who are facing that challenge. The words substance abuse might convey the idea that it is a person's own moral failing that is causing them to go through this experience, rather than something they are experiencing as the result of other factors that they are victim to. Using words such as substance use disorder may foster ideas that substance use is a disease which a person has little control over without support. The Get says that words can be tools of advocacy, which make the world more inclusive and supportive, creating a culture of acceptance and empowerment. The Get asserts that equitable terminology reduces stigma and promotes a culture of acceptance, inclusion, and dignity. Proper use of language empowers individuals to seek supportive services and resources. Acknowledging historical and systemic influences. Social determinants and health disparities of people from different backgrounds are influenced by things like racism, colonization, ableism, and varying forms of oppression. Words that convey a sense of otherism create a divide between people or imply that a person or group of people are less than another person or group should be avoided. Other times, words might describe a strict definition of something that is accurate, such as people of diverse background being called minorities. But the word minority does not convey the experience of oppression faced by people who fall into the category of being a population smaller than the majority. The word minoritized is possibly a more fitting word to indicate a person who is a part of a smaller community but faces oppression such as discrimination as a result. Considerations for adopting equity terminology. 1. Accept. Understand that equity-related language may be uncomfortable, as it may call for us to acknowledge our own biases, assumptions, and privileges. 2. Be respectful. Respect how people choose to self-identify. 3. Learn and listen. Embrace insights from people with diverse or lived experiences. 4. Be receptive. Be open to feedback related to language and be adaptable. Language used might be different per group you are in or per person you meet with. Remember to respect how people self-identify, which can be different from situation to situation. 5. Take responsibility. Even if we offend someone unintentionally, remember that this isn't about us. Everyone makes mistakes, and apologizing for them creates the impression of a safe and non-hostile environment. 6. Seek education. Seek to understand and find learning opportunities about equitable language, how social determinants show up differently for different people, and how health disparities are caused historically and systemically. Information about differences in experiences and history among people provides context to language choices. It also will help us advocate and inform others as to why certain language creates discomfort for some people. 7. Engage. Don't leave a conversation about language because it makes you uncomfortable. Try to learn something as long as the conversation is headed in a positive direction. 2 types of harmful language. We have 2 types of harmful language this program addresses. Subsequently, these are stigmatizing language, which we have already talked about, and deficit-based language. Deficit-based language is language that identifies a person by or single out a particular characteristic of a person that is considered a weakness, a flaw, or something that is not as it should be for normal or functional people. 2 types of equitable language. There are 2 primary types of equitable language. They are person-first and identity-first language. Person-first, as previously described, means considering a person as a whole person by not describing them in a limited way, such as using labels or identifiers. Consider the intersectionality of the wide array of their qualities and place the person before the identifier, disability, diagnosis, or other characteristics. Identity first means to acknowledge a person according to the way they identify, such as when a condition of theirs, or a personality or some other trait, is highly important to the way they identify themselves. Some common examples of identity first: persons with a physical disability. Sometimes we refer to people with a disability as handicapped or crippled. A better term for this is person with a disability, or person who is disabled. Deaf. Many people who are hard of hearing or who are living with a hearing impairment prefer the term deaf when they or their condition are being described by another person. Autistic. Many people who are on the autism spectrum prefer simply to be called autistic rather than a person with autism. Dwarfism. There are more differences with this community of people in how they prefer to be addressed. As with all issues of person-first or identity-first language, it may be helpful to ask how they would like you to approach the subject of their nature. LGBTQ+. This group of people have different ways they would like to be addressed. There are many variations in pronouns used for this community. It is important to know what the pronouns mean so that you do not refer to anyone in a way that does not fit or confuse their identity. Other pronouns that are different from binary: he or she identities, them, they, theirs. Even though some of these terms may traditionally be used in the plural, they can also be used to identify an individual. Her, sie. Her replaces the words her, hers, him, his, they, theirs. Sie replaces the words he, she, they. Name. Some people simply use their name as their identifier. A good way to start a group or one-on-one support. Figuring out how to determine what language to use is a pretty difficult situation. A good way to start a group or one-on-one support is to introduce yourself, the facilitator or supporter, using some pronouns and identifiers that you use for yourself. Follow this by asking if anyone else has any words they use to describe themselves that they want group members to be aware and respectful of. Section 3. Common examples of deficit or stigmatizing language. Common examples of deficit or stigmatizing language are: Number 1. Addict. Alternatives are person who uses substances, person with a substance use disorder, person in recovery. 2. Developmentally disabled. Alternative is individual with developmental disabilities. 3. Disabled, handicapped, crippled. Alternative is person with a disability. 4. Able-bodied or normal. Alternative is person without a disability. 5. Weakness. Alternative is barrier. 6. Mentally impaired individual, retarded, retard, slow, dumb. Alternative is individual with intellectual disabilities. 7. Alcoholic. Alternatives are person who drinks frequently, person in recovery, person with an alcohol use disorder. 8. Falls risk. Alternative is a person at risk for falls. 9. Frequent flyer. Alternative is utilizes services when needed. 10. Abuses the system. Alternative is good self-advocate. 11. Low functioning. Alternative is in need of support with. 12. Suffers from. Alternatives are a person living with, a person who has, a person working to recover from or experiencing. 13. Lazy. Alternatives are ambivalent, working to build hope. 14. High functioning. Alternative is capable of. 15. Non-compliant, resistant, refuses. Alternatives are chooses not to, has barriers, isn't ready for, not open to, experiences challenges and issues. 16. Manipulative. Alternative is resourceful. 17. Wheelchair-bound. Alternatives are a person who uses a wheelchair, a person who lacks mobility. 18. Attention seeker. Alternative is someone who has not, or is not, having their needs met. 18. Victim. Vulnerable. Alternative is survivor. You might notice that in the table above, abuses the system, good self-advocate, and manipulative, resourceful, are highlighted in yellow. With these, some people find this to be a stretch. How do these terms rooted in deficit or stigma relate to the strength-based and person-centered alternatives? Well, imagine a person receiving some benefits from the system we have today. Most often, the system is set up in a way that no one can really abuse it. There exist some meager number of resources, and a person has to meet strict criteria to receive assistance. The person who might be seen as abusing the system is simply advocating for themselves when needed to receive the same benefits that are available to anyone else. The opposite of this self-advocacy is to not take advantage of resources that are meant to ease the burden faced by the community. So self-advocacy is no less than what we should expect. How about manipulative, how resourceful? Did you know that the most intelligent of people start showing signs of manipulation at earlier ages than less intelligent people? People who manipulate are altering a situation or perception of a situation in a way that does not seem apparently harmful to others to get them to do what the person needs done. For kids growing up who are neglected and abused, manipulating others for the things that they are seriously lacking is often a necessity. By riding this thin line between what is appropriate and what is inappropriate and noticeable to others, a person who is not having their needs met is being very resourceful indeed. Section 4. Words that imply some other kind of relationship, other than a mutual one. Other relationship. Patient, client, participant, member, consumer. Mutual relationship. Peer, person, individual. I support, instead of saying my participant, CS, try saying my peers who participate in the program. Section 5. Words that have a historic or systemic connotation of oppression. Here are examples of historical oppressive connotation or word used, specifically by an oppressed cultural group, reserved for their use only, origin of word, and their suggested alternative. Word number 1, committed suicide. Origin. In early England, committing suicide was considered a sin and a crime. Suggested alternative, died by suicide. Word number 2, spook. Origin, anti-black slur used by white soldiers in WWII. Suggested. Alternative, person. Word number 3, grandfathered in. Origin, dates back to 19th century grandfather clause that limited black Americans from voting, limiting voting privileges for only people whose ancestors could vote. Suggested. Alternative, exempt. Word number 4, black sheep, blacklist, black male. Origin, dates back very far where white began to be considered pure and black was considered impure. Suggested alternative, scapegoat, deny list, ransom. Word number 5, sold down the river. Origin, where black slaves were sold down the Mississippi River for profit. Suggested alternative, change in ownership. Word number 6, savage, barbaric. Origin, initially used with the Romans who considered northern European peoples to be barbarians, savage was used to indicate indigenous peoples of the Americas. Suggested alternative, fierce, ferocious, vicious, severe. Word number 7, first world, third world. Origin, indicates countries that have more privilege than others or countries who lack refinement. Suggested alternative, nations without or with fewer barriers, nations with barriers or who are developing. Word number 8, tribe, spirit animal, powwow, origin. These are terms referred to by people who are indigenous or native to the Americas. Suggested alternative: group, ego, gathering. Word number 9, gypsy and gypt, origin, indicated the people of Roma. Negative connotation that the people of Roma often swindled or cheated others. Indicated them as others or foreigners because they often traveled to other countries outside of their own. Suggested alternative: traveler, cheated. Word number 10, lowest on totem pole, origin, is a contextually wrong way to describe something of lesser importance by ascribing figures on a totem pole as being more important if they are situated above another figure. Suggested alternative: subordinate, junior, lowest on the ladder, social ladder. Word number 11, ghetto, inner city, origin, related to the Holocaust and Jewish survivors of the Holocaust who lived in supposed ghettos. Is used to describe poorer regions of a city, primarily where Black Americans or immigrants live. Suggested alternative: developing neighborhoods. Word number 12, dumb, lame, origin, used primarily to describe someone who lacks intelligence or is boring. Originally used to describe someone who cannot speak or have limited range of motion. It can be offensive to the people who live with these disabilities. Suggested alternative: person who has an intellectual challenge, person with a disability. Section 6, final thoughts. Other words we should phase out. Shoot, 4. Alternative is make our goal or purpose. Aim, 4. Alternative, make our goal or purpose. Trigger. Alternative, cause to happen. Stressor, under the gun. Alternative, short on time, time sensitive. Time restraint, short on time, time sensitive. Cut or cutter. Alternative, remove, reduce, person who inflicts self-harm. Scenario 1, harmful language. Dr. Smith is writing notes about a patient during a routine checkup. Patient is a 45-year-old alcoholic who has been a frequent flyer in the emergency department. She is non-compliant with her medication and frequently abuses the system. Her wheelchair-bound condition and low functioning make her a challenge to manage. Scenario 1, strength-based language. Dr. Smith is writing notes about the same patient using strength-based language. Patient is a 45-year-old person with an alcohol use disorder who utilizes services when needed in the emergency department. She chooses not to take her medication consistently and is a good self-advocate. She uses a wheelchair and is in need of support with her mobility, which presents some challenges in her care. Scenario 2, harmful language. Dr. Jones is documenting a patient consultation in a mental health clinic. The patient is a 30-year-old who is mentally impaired and is resistant to treatment. He is a victim of his circumstances and is lazy in following through with recommendations. He often manipulates caregivers for personal gain, and his reliance on this is a weakness. Scenario 2, strength-based language. Dr. Jones is documenting the same patient consultation using strength-based language. The person I am supporting is a 30-year-old male with intellectual disabilities who experiences challenges in accepting treatment. He is a survivor of difficult circumstances and is working to build hope in his recovery. He is resourceful in his interactions with caregivers, and his care plan should focus on addressing barriers and supporting his engagement.